win. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Robert Walton has been jet-setting in recent weeks in Singapore for the YYY Awards and then back to London to host the inaugural Restaurant Association Awards.
Yep, and after many years in the industry, Robert also knows a thing or two about how to create the perfect Christmas. And it's all in the preparation. So we're going to be asking him about that as well. I'm delighted to say that the godfather of hospitality, Robert Walton, MBE, joins us now on the sofa.
Morning, Robert.
Robert,
Good
so
morning.
good to see you. And what a busy few weeks you have had. Yeah. Should we start with the YYY Awards? Because I think it's just wonderful who you celebrated at those awards.
So the YYY, young chef, young waiter, young mixologist. And it's a competition that's created around the world. So people from all around the world can apply. So this year we had 9 countries, from India to the Caribbean, from the USA to Scotland and England. And so we had 27 young professionals. The average age was about 24.
Wow.
All coming to Singapore. So we flew everyone to Singapore. We create what I call the Olympic Village. We create a little village for them, and it's in a very cool spot with great bars. And then we have the competition. And this year, I can now announce, I was here just a few weeks ago before we had the competition, that the USA won, which was absolutely incredible. Thailand was second. And gorgeous Wales was third.
Yes.
Well done, Wales.
Well done, Wales.
We now expect to have a good meal. There's no reason why you shouldn't have good food. The key now is the service, because there's no reason why you don't have good service. And good service is not that difficult. Smile, to start with. It really isn't that difficult. It's called hospitable. We call the industry, or the sector we look after is the hospitality industry, which is all about being hospitable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Every day that passes comes more evidence that Sir Keir Starmer is trying to drag the UK back into the EU's orbit. Downing Street has refused to rule out return to the EU's court in what would be the ultimate betrayal of British democracy. As Labour crashed the economy. Following its brutal budget, the worst hiring slump on record has deepened as market confidence crashes. Can Red Rachel survive? Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has made a suggestion of a flat tax if the Tories were to come to power. Tonight, I will reveal the plan I proposed for a flat tax when I was in office. Plus, that broadcast regulator Ofcom has faced censure following its new social media guidance on hate speech, pressurising social media companies to crack down on it even if it's not illegal. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most pugnacious panel, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the journalist and broadcaster, Matthew Stadlen. As ever, it's a crucial part of the programme. Let me know your views. mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. Sarah Sharif's father and stepmother have been sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of their 10-year-old daughter following years of horrific abuse. Irfan Sharif was handed a minimum of 40 years in prison, while Bainash Batul received 33 years. Her uncle, Faisal Malik, was jailed for 16 years for failing to prevent her death. Sarah was hooded, burned and beaten during a campaign of torture that lasted 2 years before her body was found at the family home in Surrey in 2013. Nigel Farage is back in the UK after meeting with Elon Musk at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. The Reform UK leader was joined by his party treasurer, Nick Candy, to meet with Musk for the first time since rumours surfaced of a multi-million donation from the tech tycoon. Speaking moments ago on GB News, Nigel Farage said donations were discussed.
All the press stories, we did discuss money. Now, that's a negotiation we will go back and have again. He is not against giving us money. He hasn't fully decided whether he will. If he does, it wouldn't be anything like the ludicrous telephone numbers quoted in the Sunday Times. But the most important thing is this. This is what Musk said to me. He said, British politics now has a uni party. There is very little to choose between the Labour and Conservative parties. And he genuinely fears that the mother country of the English-speaking world is frankly going down the tubes. But he has not closed his mind towards helping us in any way that he...
Now, it's being reported that the new Prime Minister of Mauritius says the Chagos Islands deal struck by Sir Keir Starmer isn't good enough and he wants to reopen talks. It's understood he rejects current terms as they would not produce the benefits that the nation could expect. His government has made counter-proposals to London and received a response, though no details have yet been provided. In other news, the government has rejected calls for compensation for women affected by changes to the state pension age. The Work and Pension Secretary says paying a flat rate to all women born in the 1950s would cost taxpayers more than £10 billion and wouldn't be fair. Women Against State Pension Inequality, also known as WASPI, say they weren't informed properly about the information of changes. While Liz Kendall admitted there was a delay in notifying women, she insisted most were aware of the pension age rise. She has now confirmed there will be no compensation scheme, despite calls for one. And some breaking news. Fresh train strikes have been announced over New Year after an offer was rejected by Avanti West Coast staff. Workers are walking out after rejecting a deal aimed at resolving a dispute over rest day working. The RMT union said its members working as train managers will strike on New Year's Eve, January the 2nd, and Sundays between January 12th and May 25th. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. The ultimate betrayal of British democracy is underway. Last week, we revealed Labour's obscure metrology bill that is sliding through the House of Lords. The bill will enable the government to align UK regulations with the EU as a matter of default with minimal parliamentary scrutiny. But over the weekend, more revelations confirmed Labour's ambitions to drag us back into the European Union by stealth, the grandmother's footsteps approach. The Mail revealed a squad of dozens of civil servants is being assembled in the Cabinet Office to handle negotiations with Brussels as part of Sir Keir Starmer's reset of relations with the EU. It's clear that the European Union is demanding a youth mobility scheme and acceptance of EU rules as its opening gambit, and insiders have told the Mail that the surrender squad, cheese-eating surrender monkeys of civil servants, will yield to the demands of the EU superstate. But now, a government spokesman has refused to rule out a role for the European Union Senior Court, the European Court of Justice, in the renegotiations. If Labour accepts any jurisdiction to the European Court of Justice, that is a betrayal of the electorate, because once again our democracy would be subject to a foreign power and your vote in those areas would be meaningless. As for youth mobility, with massive continental youth unemployment, that risks adding to the flood of migrants when instead we need a dam to stop the flood of migrants, while more regulation would simply keep us linked to sclerotic EU growth rates. The only hope to undo what Labour is about to do is for the next Conservative government to make it clear that if we win, it would cancel any of this agreement on its first day in office. In order to reduce migration, it must undo any loosening of migration rules with the European Union, youth mobility scheme or otherwise. If we want to unleash growth, we must cut the regulations and align ourselves with the fast growth United States, not the slow growth European Union. And most importantly, If we want to exercise national sovereignty, the key to that is who judges our laws, so we cannot allow the jurisdiction of the European Court to come back to the United Kingdom. Labour is a party of Remainers. Starmer wanted a second referendum. It shows that it will do whatever it can to take us back into the orbit, the ambit, the control of the European Union. Whatever happens with these talks, the next Conservative government, or Reform government for that matter, must reclaim everything that Labour surrenders. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com, but I'm particularly pleased to be joined by a friend of the programme and former Labour advisor, Matthew Torbett. Matthew, thank you for coming in.
Okay.
You're a Democrat, accepted the result. Keir Starmer wanted a second referendum, and now he won't even rule out the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, ruling on matters that affect the UK. Surely that is an attempt to undermine the whole referendum.
No, I don't think so. I think, I was a Democrat. Many of us, I was sort of a reluctant Remainer to put my cards on the table. I'd studied EU law and I thought better the devil you know, in a sense. But I understood Tony Benn was one of my political heroes and believed in proper democracy and sovereignty and whatever else. I think the problem is probably in the whole Brexit debate, in the sense that the question that was asked was, would you like to leave the European Union? Would you like to remain or leave? Now, we voted to leave, and we've left the framework of the European Union. I think the problem since then is Brexit hasn't necessarily made people feel better off, which certain people said they might. And, maybe you could lay the door of blame at the pandemic a little bit as well, which maybe hasn't helped things. But ultimately, people don't feel very well off at the moment. They feel the worst they have in a long time. And we didn't enter a discussion, despite us now doing it, necessarily about the single market, the customs union. I'd have happily accepted a Norway-type deal. Let's not shaft ourselves in the foot economically, but we leave the framework of the EU, and I hope that would please all sides. I think Joe Soap on the street wouldn't be that interested or engaged in the fact that we might stay part of the ECJ. And the only thing you didn't mention in that monologue, which was very, very dark and depressing, I must admit, is Northern Ireland. So the ECJ would obviously be the ultimate arbiter over things like Northern Ireland. And having visited Belfast to do some research last year, it cannot be overstated, how fragile peace still is in Northern Ireland and between both sides. So I think, a bit like Winston Churchill, why can't you ride both horses on America and the EU, and maybe even China? It would be hard work, but not impossible.
I think there are difficulties. First of all, the EU's economies are doing badly. And if you look at GDP per capita, broadly similar in the advanced EU countries in 2000, now significantly below that of the US. In the UK's case, we were 10% below, we're now 40% below. So we've had a couple of decades of low growth. One of the advantages of Brexit is deregulation, and one of the advantages for the fishermen that they reclaim our territorial waters. They're already £50 million a year ahead of where they were when we left. It is a Brexit benefit. It seems from these talks that the fishermen would risk being sacrificed again. And I know that £50 million in the whole scheme of the UK economy is not a huge amount. But these are communities that voted for something that they now risk losing. And I think that's a very unfortunate way for a democratic government to be going.
I don't know if that would be the case. I think it's worthy to stay in certain programmes. I've got a couple of friends in Brussels who said we've been partaking in things like Horizon since you guys were still in government. I think being part of things like that are good for the whole worldwide community. Did people, and I suppose this is the sort of moral or philosophical question, did they vote for this? Or did they vote based primarily on a debate around immigration?
Well, if they voted, I think they did vote on fishing, actually. I think fishing had a disproportionate influence considering its influence in the economy. I think people felt a lot of community spirit with the fishermen. In terms of migration, opening up to young people, a free movement of people, that seems to me a terrible mistake politically, apart from anything else, because immigration is the subject of the moment, that immigration is much too high, and because a Tory, I accept that we must take some blame for that. But you've got a government that must want to get migration down. So opening up a new scheme goes in the wrong direction and clearly against what British people seem to want.
If that's on the cards, potentially, because I think immigration will quite almost certainly be the hot topic at the next general election, whether that be in 3 or 4 years. I think what Nigel Farage and Reform have done is totally mainstreamed and not quite detoxified, but brought it into the public lexicon in a way that people seem more emboldened to be able to air their views and not feel like they're going to be shouted down necessarily. And it appears the Prime Minister doesn't quite know how to deal with it other than say, look, we're gonna bring it down. And there's a hell of a lot of, as you said, a hell of a lot of youth unemployment, particularly in places like Spain and across the Mediterranean. However, we've got huge shortages as well, particularly in hospitality, particularly when it comes to fruit picking and other things. And I think, again, this comes back, and this isn't necessarily directed at you, but when we bring up the idea of Brexit, you get people, I can never decide whether they sound almost like communists or people I went to school with at primary school, because they can't tell you what Brexit was. It means something different to every single person. So it's almost like going, well, communism hasn't worked because it's not been tried properly yet. We've not done Brexit properly yet. I've got a girlfriend, but she lives in another school. She goes, all this sort of stuff. So I think this is part of the problem as well. Nobody's clearly defined it.
All right, well, we'll move back then to the court because you see, it seems to me, and Tony Benn would have said this, the fundamental thing about Brexit was who governs. What was his line? That a bad parliament was better than a good king, because ultimately you can change your parliament and you can't change your king. Once you have your superior court being a court that you democratically cannot overrule, that actually really matters.
As a Democrat, yes, I can see sense in that argument. I think also, though, that there's other things we'll still be part of. There's a big debate at the moment about the ECHR.
Yes, but the ECHR is different because it doesn't take automatic effect. Its judgments have to be brought in by Parliament, and Parliament occasionally says no, as it did on prisoner voting rights. With the ECJ, it has always had direct effect, and therefore it becomes senior to the High Court of Parliament. That's my biggest objection, and always has been, actually, to the European Union.
Which I can sympathise with the point. I come back then again to the issue of Northern Ireland and how we go about that, with part of it still being in the single market, and how we go about that without undermining the Good Friday Agreement, because for me that was the one sort of white elephant that everybody either forgot about or wasn't aware of during the debate, potentially other than people in Northern Ireland. And I think until you find a solution to ensuring that peace is sustained, in that the Good Friday Agreement isn't broken nor undermined, I don't see how we can move or drift away from things like the ECJ, or whether it would be a good idea in principle.
Matthew, thank you very much indeed. After the messages, did Labour crash the economy, and can Red Rachel survive? Thank you.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Last orders at the bar, and I'm joined by Geordie Shore star Ricky Guanaccio. Have I said that right? Is that Italian?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Italian, your parents Italian? Is it?
Pronunciation was pretty much perfect.
Yeah, well, there you go. So, look, mate, Geordie Shore, I've never watched it, mate, so I do apologise about that. But I know these reality TV shows are making big stars out of the people, making you famous, making you loads of money. Is it worth it?
For me personally, yeah. It's been a hell of a career. Been a hell of a lot of fun doing it, ups and downs, but first and foremost, money-wise,
That's good. So people stopping in the street, you being famous, wanting the autograph and all. How did you cope with that, Ricky?
Well, when we first started doing the show, I mean, we got our show off the back of Jersey Shore in America. We never expected the fame that we got, and being one of the biggest reality TV shows in the UK and now the world. It's in 150 odd countries worldwide. Wow. It's pretty crazy. It's when you're living in houses. I mean, for example, Geordie Shore and Love Island's probably the same as well. When you're living in villas and you're living in houses, the arguing side sort of plays on your mind. You've got to deal with all that. It's a hard place to be. It's a pressure cooker.
You're living in one of these villas, Ricky, or one of these houses. Do you ever wake up one morning and think, what am I doing here?
When I first started, yes. Yeah. Now, I love it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I don't mind all the, there's no emotion connecting me now with filming. It's kind of like I go in there, it's fun, or it's, it's dramatic, whatever it may be.
Okay. Have you ever worked behind a bar?
No.
No?
For not a long period of time. My mum and dad had a...
Well, I can
definitely mess this one up.
Yeah, I can actually believe that you've never worked behind a bar.
Yeah, so my parents sacked us when I worked in the restaurant.
Well, obviously, I mean, you wouldn't get a job here with a pint like that, would you?
Do you want it?
No, mate, no.
GBNews, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute. kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about the Brexit betrayal by this socialist government. And Peter says Starmageddon means national betrayal and decline, and it's only going to get worse. Even Jeremy Corbyn would have done a better job as PM. That's just how bad things are. And Roger says Brexit has not worked as well as it could have, as Labour and the Conservatives have tried to stop it and didn't work to make it a success. Now, Roger, you may be onto something. So has Red Rachel crashed the economy? That was the allegation levelled at Liz Truss after the mini-budget. But let's look at the data. We've seen government borrowing costs surpass those of the Truss mini-budget since Labour came to power. We've seen the economy contract in both September and October, and now the unemployment data are out and are dire. The UK's worst hiring slump has worsened, with the number of job vacancies falling by 31,000 to a three-year low of 818,000 in the UK in the 3 months to November. Well, I'm joined now by my most pugnacious panel, the former editor of The Sun, Mr. Pugnacious himself, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the journalist and broadcaster Matthew Stadlen. Well, Mr. Pugnacious, let me get you in on this.
Thank you.
Red Rachel has made a difficult economic situation that much worse. And we seem to me to be entering a period of stagflation, that we've got inflation going up because of cost rises going through the budget tax measures. We've got low economic growth because businesses have been hit. This is a really difficult situation.
I think it's difficult. And the people I feel most sorry for are anybody who's running a small business. Say, I don't know, I know small is now, basically got to be under $1 billion, but actually somebody who's employing between 5 and 15 employees in which they've had these surprise costs thrown at them. And there's two things you can do. You can actually stick your prices up and hope for the best. That's a difficult environment, I would say. And in fact, what most traders are saying right now is that the economy is soft generally, and lying on the top of it now is you have these increases in hiring costs because minimum pay has gone through the roof. Now, of course, my socialist friend over there will be massively in favour of skint socialists getting a pay rise, but minimum pay going up and NI going up, it's a nightmare. And the question now is whether actually the tax that they're taking from companies, which the government are now going to spend, is actually going to lead to an increase actually in output. And that is a possibility. And we've all got to keep our fingers crossed because every other indicator is at red, which says we are going into a recession. Now, we had one under the Tories. Remember, it was called, oh, don't worry about it, it's a small recession. Recessions do matter. We can't have places like the United States charging away and even China at 4.8% with us going backwards. We will simply become too poor.
Matthew, is a risk of a downward spiral, isn't there, that you put taxes up, you don't get the revenue you expect from them, and it looks as if the death duties on farmers and indeed the VAT will both cost money rather than raise money. You therefore have a bigger deficit, taxes go up again, and the economy goes down and down.
I think we've got to be careful. I mean, have to be careful. But as proud Brits, I would perhaps counsel that we should be a little bit careful not to talk ourselves into a recession. I mean, I don't know whether you guys remember, but Comical Ali, he was the Minister for Information, wasn't he, under Saddam Hussein, who kept saying that everything was fine as Baghdad was falling around him. You'd have to be the sort of British version of Comical Ali to pretend that our economy is going gangbusters so far. but we're only, this is only so much time I can continue to use these sorts of phrases, but we are still
You've got about
only,
another 18 months,
We are
actually.
only 5 or 6 months in. Now, I was speaking in January on stage to Sir Vince Cable, former leader of the Liberal Democrats, and he was echoing something that Andrew Marr, respected broadcaster, I think had said previously. And there's this idea that if, perhaps even when, Keir Starmer fails to deliver in 2 years' time, because it's going to be very, very hard to deliver in these circumstances and to arrest this decline, let alone turn it round, then the door swings open for the hard or far right. You take your pick of the phrase you use. And at the moment, Reform, who I disagree with fundamentally on almost everything, but you cannot deny they are an agile bunch of 5 and they are ready to pounce.
Yes, and by the way, Andrew Marr, of course, was the man who said that when Starmer got elected, he said, the adults are back in charge. I mean, the most ridiculous thing I think I've ever seen, and how anybody can take Marr seriously after that is totally beyond.
Well, it's a bit harsh, Kelvin. I mean,
well, I'm not being harsh. I could be very harsh about Andrew Marr. I'm just quoting what he said.
You've said plenty of things yourself, Kelvin. I'm sure I have too, that would mean many people wouldn't take either of us seriously anymore.
That is not true in my case, Matthew. I don't know.
No, he said things pugnaciously, but the difficulty is, can the Labour Party carry on this route? I mean, I was mentioning, can Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, survive? Because when the election took place, she was seen to be the obvious successor to Keir Starmer if he were run over by a bus. But she's been really damaged by this economic downturn and her budget making it worse. Your argument is a perfectly reasonable one. Governments always use it. Look at our inheritance. That was fine up until the budget, which sort of owned the downturn and did things that seemed to have made it worse.
Well, we're playing a sort of Christmas cracker around the Christmas tree game of political predictions, aren't we? And how can any of us possibly predict whether Rachel Reeves will be in post in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time? I think we all have to hope, actually, whether you agree with her politics or not, that she is in post, because that surely would be a reflection the economy is doing rather well. Don't forget the OBR. I know you don't respect the Office of Budget Responsibility, but I'm one of those who takes it reasonably seriously. And their view, I think, post-budget, was that there was some hope for medium or longer-term growth. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom.
Well, I think the OBR are simply the poodles of Number 10, aren't they, really? They have to check everything. After all, they all swap economists and everything. They're all in the same game. Look, we want things to be successful. But when you get people like the boss of Reed, the recruiter, basically saying that the signs are that we are heading towards a recession, it's not in his interest. What he is seeing is what's happening on the job front. And if I am going to hire somebody, and I've just found out they're for a number of reasons, they're more expensive. Am I going to hire 2 of them, or am I going to hire 1 of them? Or am I going to say, let's just look what business looks like for 6 months or so, and then make a decision?
What would you have done, though, Kelvin? That's the big problem for someone sitting in your seat. And it's, of course, much easier.
It's not a problem for me.
Ask you the question.
The country is sitting in your seat. The whole bloody thing has collapsed.
It's much easier to be in your seat now, or in the seat I occupied before this general election, throwing stones.
To be a critic.
Exactly, from the outside. What sort of budget would you have presided over? Because if we hadn't put money into the NHS, then the people watching this programme would have been on long waiting lists for a longer time. If we don't invest in trains and the people who drive them, then you don't get the fuel to keep the economy going.
You crossed the line there. Train drivers, 93,600 for a shift on Sundays, 4 days weeks, all your family travel by train. Why are we all in here? We should be out there driving trains.
I'll try and be incredibly precise and concise. My point is, of course, I was concerned when Rachel Reeves hit smaller businesses, and there was that debate about whether it was or wasn't in the manifesto. But I understand perfectly well the arguments that might have a negative impact on growth. And if that turns out to be the case in the medium term, that will be disastrous. I readily accept that. But what she was trying to do, and what the government was trying to do, was to actually invest, unlike the Tories, when interest rates have been low. If you don't invest in the economy, how can you create the conditions for
I'm not here to defend the Tories. I'm just saying I had no idea the Socialists were going to be so dreadful so early on. I don't know whether you've seen that Starmer now, he's only 5 months in, he's already the most unpopular Prime Minister back until the 70s when Jim Callaghan.
Right, well, on that happy note, the most unpopular Prime Minister since Jim Callaghan, Sunny Jim, I must thank my panel panel. In a moment, I'll be revealing the radical proposition I made when in government to slash taxes and the size of the state. Plus, the latest clue to the question of whether Elon Musk will donate to the Reform Party emerges.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Whilst it's pretty mild at the moment, we are going to see temperatures dropping as we go through the next 24 to 48 hours or so. And before that, we have some strong winds and some heavy rain due to an area of low pressure that's currently tracking just to the north of the UK, and it is deepening as it does so. As a result, we've already seen the winds strengthening. The strongest winds overnight will be around western coastal parts. Here, gusts could reach 50 to 60 miles per hour, and there will be quite a bit of wet weather around, the heaviest, most persistent rain towards the north and west. With all the unsettled weather around, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, most places staying in high single figures, if not double digits. So it will be a mild start to the day for many of us tomorrow, but quite a blustery or windy one. Across southern parts of England, there will be some outbreaks of drizzly rain and also some low cloud bringing some hill fog. Across northern parts of England, some heavy persistent rain could cause some problems on the roads. Meanwhile, across Northern Ireland and Scotland, the more persistent rain will have pushed through, but there'll be plenty of showers following in behind. Whilst it will be a mild start to the day here, we're going to have some colder air coming in from the northwest. As a result, temperatures are actually going to drop in the north as we go through the day, and so there's a good chance that some of those showers will turn wintry, especially over higher ground. Otherwise, and we are going to see some bright weather for a time, some sunshine developing in many places, and in the south holding on to that milder air, so temperatures well above average for the time of year, but later on some wet weather feeding in from the southwest. That will then push through eastwards as we go overnight into Thursday, clearing away during Thursday morning. And then yes, there are some showers around on Thursday, but a good deal of dry and at times bright weather, but we have a northerly or northwesterly wind, so temperatures dropping. Thursday is going to be markedly colder than the start of this week. Temperatures should pick up again as we head towards the weekend with a bit of rain at times.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about Labour and Red Rachel crashing the economy, and the mail mogs have come in. Pam says, I don't know how Red Rachel sleeps at night. Perhaps she listens to her own speeches. She should not hold her position of Chancellor of the Exchequer. She's not qualified enough. None of Labour are. And Graham says, Graham, I agree with what you're saying. We aren't talking ourselves into recession. We are taxing and spending ourselves into recession thanks to the fools in power. The leader of the Conservative Party, Ken Badenoch, has signalled a very encouraging policy, a flat tax. She had this to say on the subject yesterday.
And this is an idea that I've heard many times. It's very attractive. But if we're going to get to that sort of scenario, there's a lot of work we will need to do firsthand. At the moment, we are a welfare state with a little bit of an economy attached to it. We've got to turn that around. We cannot afford flat taxes where we are now. We need to make sure we rewire our economy so that we can lighten the burden of tax and of regulation on individuals and on those businesses that are just starting out in particular. People see the businesses that close, they don't see the businesses that never started in the first place. And I'm quite worried about that because those are the seeds for the next generation.
As it happens, I proposed exactly this when I was in government with Liz Truss, a fully costed flat tax taking the Treasury figures that would have been covered by removing tax breaks from the system. Well, I'm joined now by my panel, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and journalist and broadcaster Matthew Stadlen. Matthew, This comes to the fundamental question of what you think tax is there for, whether it is there to even out incomes or whether it is there for the maximum economic growth. I think the latter. Where would you say the Labour Party is?
Well, I personally think that tax is to put into public services so that we can be treated on the NHS, we can send our children to school and we can be defended from foreign threats.
Yes, no, get all that. But do you think it is a moral thing in itself? Do you think it is right, if you can fund everything with a flat tax of 20%, to tax some people more because they earn so much?
Morality is a tricky word in this context, but I would suggest that those with the broadest shoulders should pay more than those who don't have such broad shoulders. But if you can make the sums add up without having penal taxes at higher levels... Don't get me wrong, I don't believe in taxes as a form of punishment.
Or of equalling out. Do you want income equality as a policy aim?
No.
That's very important because, Kelvin, I think a lot of Labour politicians over the years have seen income equality as a benefit in itself, and Conservatives don't and shouldn't.
Yeah, no, although I don't agree with Badenoch, and I don't agree with you. Look, we've got a lot of problems in our country. Changing the tax system, right, I found an absurd thing to say half an hour into her leadership, right? This is something to be talked about perhaps with 6 months to go, and I am baffled. I'm baffled as to why she felt that this was a moment to raise this.
But Kemi can't win in these circumstances because if she doesn't say things, everyone says she's not doing anything. If she says something interesting and thought-provoking, people say this is far too early.
I mean, I don't know how long she's going to be there. I definitely haven't seen any example of her being a long-term leader of the Conservative Party, especially with a rampant reform. Grabbing all the headlines, you know, one meeting 3,000 miles away gets 10 times the publicity, which a rather bizarre diversion into our current tax arrangements. I find it almost impossible to believe that she is going to be a leader.
On the substance of that, I think to be fair to Kemi Badenoch, she was answering a question in a way such as would not alienate the questioner, because she was in a room, I think, effectively of friends and supporters, really. So why sort of poo-poo such a suggestion? I think her answer made it perfectly clear that under her leadership, in the highly unlikely event that she would become Prime Minister, there's going to be no flat tax anytime soon. On a bit more of the substance, at least on the politics, I think Kelvin has some force to what he's saying, because it seems to me, and maybe this is spending too much time on social media, but it seems to me that Reform are providing the most challenging opposition or the most threatening opposition to the Labour Party, not because they've got a plan. I don't think they've got any sort of plan. I think the idea of Nigel Farage running the country is absolutely terrifying, but because they're very effective campaigners. And we know that Farage is probably the most effective campaigner of his political generation. I mean, he effected enormous multi-generational defining change through Brexit.
He knew more about the people than, for instance, no surprise to me, by the way, than David Cameron did.
On that issue.
But hold on a second. That has turned out to be the biggest political issue of all our lifetimes. I mean, he is a phenomenon, Farage. And my sense now is that phenomenon that won Brexit, we are now going to see it happen over the years ahead, and whether it's county councils or whatever kind of councils we've got coming forward, we're going to see some quite explosive things happen.
Let me put an irony to you. Some people who voted for Brexit, by no means all, voted for Brexit because they wanted effectively to stop immigration, or at least to stop mass immigration. Some people voted for Brexit, not everyone who was anti-immigration, but some, so listen to my words carefully, because they were racist. And what they've got instead is far more people, it seems to me, coming in from places outside
That
Europe.
is true, by the way.
That
is true. Your argument is they're going to come by bus. They're coming by bus and by lorry anyway, and there is some truth to that. But the vast quantity have come this way because we voted Brexit. There is no doubt about that.
Having won the Brexit referendum, largely, I would argue, on immigration, not exclusively, and by no means everyone who voted it were racist, but having won it on immigration, he's now taking it to the next level careful, because the immigration that has replaced that free movement is immigration that some people really don't like.
All right, let's carry on talking about Nigel, because he's been busy doing what he does best, making headlines, as Kelvin just said. And today he's further fueled the speculation that Twitter and Tesla owner Elon Musk will donate millions of pounds to the Reform Party after posting this picture. The two are pictured together along with the newly appointed Treasurer of Reform, Nick Candy, at Donald Trump's Florida resort, Mar-a-Lago. Here's what Nigel said on GB News a few moments ago.
All the press stories, we did discuss money. Now, that's a negotiation we would go back and have again. He is not against giving us money. He hasn't fully decided whether he will. If he does, it wouldn't be anything like the ludicrous telephone numbers quoted in the Sunday Times. But the most important thing is this. This is what Musk said to me. He said, British politics now has a uni-party. There is very little to choose between the Labour and Conservative parties. And he genuinely fears that the mother country of the English-speaking world is frankly going down the tubes. But he has not closed his mind towards helping us in any way that he...
Now, going down the tubes. That's quite a statement from Nigel, but getting money from Elon Musk is transformative, isn't it? It makes reform a much more serious threat. It may give it local organisation, and it gives it cachet and pizzazz. Musk is a really important figure.
Of course, undeniably. I mean, this is a man who literally now owns the digital town square. Now, it might be that TikTok and other apps and Facebook are more effective when it actually comes to campaigning in general elections. But there's no doubt that Twitter, now X, has huge power, and that Musk used that power and, of course, his money to help get Trump elected. Why did he want to get Trump elected? Partly because, obviously, who would get him into government and give him even greater power, no doubt even more money. Why he needs more money is beyond me. And partly because of this idea that has become much more prevalent on his feed in recent times, and I think a fear that Nigel Farage shares and that I utterly reject, which is that the West is somehow on a precipice. Now, I would argue that we are in some ways in decline in this country, but it's not because of immigrants.
So my issue about this is, I think it'd be fantastic. The idea that the Reform, who are utterly skint, end up with a load of money and use it in posters and TikTok and social media generally rather than conventional mainstream media, fantastic. In the Times story tonight on this started what I thought might happen. So Labour are saying, we are going to look at campaign donations, right? We're going to look at campaign donations, something they haven't mentioned before. They mention now. Can I just say, I'm Farage. I'm saying, bring it on. Because when I get to power, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop unions who are effectively bribe their way to getting deals from Starmer and the Secretary of State for Transport, handing out huge pay rises to state workers in return for you making sure you hand the money to me.
But Kelvin's really on something here, because Labour's just getting all these sorts of things wrong and really badly, and it's building up. Nigel. Next, they'll try and arrest him for something, because what are they talking about? Suspending elections in May. It's really bad news when you're doing a reorganisation, when you're so deeply unpopular. Now a political party looks as it might get some money, you ban the donations. This just makes more people want to vote for Nigel. And it's exactly the same as prosecuting Trump led to Trump winning.
Depends indeed on the narrative and how people in positions of influence, such as yourself, spin the narrative. I mean, you've just put out there this idea, this notion that Labour would somehow have Nigel Farage arrested. You've got absolutely no evidence for that.
I'm saying if you stop him raising money, where do you go next?
Well, we have very strong...
clear, I didn't think this was about to happen tomorrow.
Do we or do we not have... But you're saying the seeds of the idea, Jacob. Do we or do we not have very strong rules and laws in this country about foreign donations? And is there also not an irony that you guys would perhaps agree with me on? Nigel Farage was kicking up a great fuss, wasn't he, when Labour activists got involved in the American election? Here he is, a champion supposedly of the anti-globalists, cozying up at Mar-a-Lago, the gaff of the future president of the United States, with a billionaire.
Matthew,
come on.
You misunderstand the point I'm trying to make. There are perfectly legitimate concerns about foreign donations and perfectly legitimate concerns about them being routed through UK companies. This is a matter of timing. So Labour comes out with this, and it looks as if they're just trying to go for reform in an undemocratic way. The policy may be brilliant, but they always seem to be on the wrong foot against Nigel.
If you're talking about the politics and the optics, there's no doubt that Labour have got some important politics and some important optics wrong. And the question is whether the new regime within Number 10 is going to get its act together, because what that government is crying out for, and I never thought I would say this because I certainly wasn't a fan of the way he operated at the time, is an Alistair Campbell figure. I disagree with him on Iraq or the role he played in Iraq, but in terms of an effective communications director, he was certainly that.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've just hit rock bottom. Right, the idea that Alistair Campbell will come back to rescue anything after a man who sent at least 170 of our people to their deaths, I find an incredible idea. But look, at the end of the day, I'd love it if Reform got this. I don't know where this would leave the Conservative Party, frankly, because if they spent, say it wasn't 50 million, suppose it was 5 million quid, actually, which would be a fantastic amount of money. After all, Candice said he's going to put in $1 million. So, but if this amount of money, the idea that we're evening up. How do you feel about the trade union movement, about ASLEF making donations to the Labour Party?
We've got to move on. Unfortunately, that's the thing. We want to leave people wanting more. Thank you very much to my most pugnacious panel. After the messages from our sponsors, we'll be assessing the latest threat to freedom of speech as Ofcom begins its crackdown on so-called online hate speech.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
Unsettled at times across western parts of Europe with some stronger winds and perhaps some outbreaks of rain, but elsewhere it should be largely settled. Fairly breezy around Madeira, though largely dry, just a bit cloudy. Perhaps some thicker cloud moving into parts of Portugal with a risk of some rain, and also fairly breezy around coasts. But elsewhere it is going to be largely settled, lots of dry weather around, though perhaps just a few showers around northern parts of Italy. And the remaining largely settled as we head into the weekend, just a slight dip in temperatures by Saturday.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
But it turns out there's a growing number of grandparents who are now taking up the hobby.
And not all of them are male. 7 million gamers are aged over 50, 7 million of them. And we're going to introduce you to one this morning. Her name's Kath Bowie. She's 76 years of age, and Kath has become a worldwide star of the game Fortnite. Good to see you, Kath.
Hello, good morning to both of you.
And tell me this, Kath, is Bowie your real name?
Bowie. Yeah.
Bowie.
Yeah, it is my real name, yes.
And you do it a Bowie and not a Bowie?
It's a Bowie, yes, definitely Bowie, yes.
Bowie or Bowie?
Bowie.
Bowie.
But that's not what the Jim Bowie was called, or Jim Bowie was called in the Alamo. He was a Bowie.
No, but that's what I'm called, Kath Bowie.
Oh,
She's their own superstar.
You are your own superstar. You are indeed. Well, so we're led to believe, Kath, that there's nobody else like you, or very few people like you, but there is. There is lots of people your age, your stage, doing what you do.
Yes, there's not a lot that streams. Okay, Fortnite, but there's definitely plenty that plays. Any game, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be Fortnite. It can be any game.
So Kath, how did you get started in all of this?
Oh, yeah, well, that's 7 years ago, actually. I walked into my teenage grandson's bedroom and just saw him playing what I now know, of course, what I play is Fortnite. And that was the very first week that Epic had released it. And it was just really love at first sight.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The Online Safety Policy Director of Ofcom, John Hyam, has told The Telegraph that social media companies must remove hate speech from their platforms, even if they are unsure whether it is illegal or not, in what could be a breach of the principle of free speech. It appears from April, social media companies will be pushed to police speech beyond the standards of what is already illegal. The expansion of powers of Ofcom derives from the Online Safety Act, which created a new category of speech, that which is legal but harmful. But as ever, who ought to be the arbiter of what constitutes harmful? Unelected bureaucrats? Well, I'm joined now by Lord Moylan, Conservative peer and former advisor to Boris Johnson. Thank you very much for coming in.
You're welcome.
When this bill was going through Parliament, indeed was being discussed by the government, it was one of the most difficult, I think, because there must be some balance, a desire to regulate the internet so that hate speech, not so much hate speech, but threats to kill, threats to rape are not allowed, but that free speech is protected. And the difficulty has always been drawing the line. How do you think it should have been approached, and where do you think it's gone wrong?
Well, I took a large part in the debate on this Act when it was in the House of Lords. And I think we need to start with what was, I think, an important principle that was motivating it, which came from the case of a young girl, a teenage girl called Molly Russell, who took her own life. And it transpired that she'd not only been spending a lot of time watching on the internet quite dark material that was encouraging self-harm and suicide, but also that the algorithms of the internet multiplied that effect. So if you watch something that was harmful, encouraging self-harm, you'd get more stuff sent to you of a similar character. So it was multiplying. And there must be something wrong with that. And there must be something that should be done, at least, to protect children from this sort of terrible thing. So that was a very good motivation, in a way, behind the bill. And I would agree with that. I mean, I think what we can do to protect children on the internet, we should do. But, of course, it's almost impossible then to legislate for doing that without spreading the tentacles and the reach of the bill into areas that affect adults. And so you immediately run into the question of free speech and what people are allowed to say. And the bill, I think, went completely wild at that point. It just took off.
And the bits you mentioned, the darker bits of the web that encourage harm and self-harm and things like that, you don't want those for adults either, do you? Or do you think that free speech means that you shouldn't stop them?
Well, I don't know. I think that this is where the debate, I think, ought to have been. In fact, the debate just got wider and wider. So we got to the point, for example, where there was a debate about a requirement that internet companies, should take material down if it was harmful before there was any complaint about it. In other words, there'd be a pre-vetting of what went on. And Wikipedia, which of course relies on open writing of what... If you pre-vetted everything that was written on Wikipedia, the whole model would collapse. And
yes.
Even if they kept it going for the English language, which has a great demand, the smaller languages, like Welsh Wikipedia, there's nobody to do it that would actually be able to do all of that pre-vetting and so on. So I asked the government, I asked the minister at the dispatch box, is Wikipedia covered by this or not? And he said it's up to Ofcom to decide. I have no idea.
And that comes to Ofcom.
That sort of grew massively into areas that were frankly absurd.
Ofcom today, Dame Melanie Dawes, the chief executive, has said for too long sites and apps have been unregulated, unaccountable and unwilling to prioritise people's safety over profits. That changes from today. The safety spotlight is now firmly on tech firms and it's time for them to act. We'll be watching the industry closely to ensure firms match up to the strict safety standards set for them under our first codes and guidance, with further requirements to follow swiftly in the first half of next year. Those that come up short can expect Ofcom to use the full extent of our enforcement powers against them. It worries me about this statement, partly this nonsense about safety over profits, which just assumes profit is a dirty word, classic lefty view of the world. But why should Ofcom decide? What democratic mandate does Ofcom have? And why is this better than allowing sensible regulation by companies of themselves as to what they think is proper?
Well, there is already
adults?
quite a lot of self-regulation by companies, but the complaint, it was interesting in the House of Lords, there was a group of people, very well organised, who were solidly in support of this bill. And there's no doubt at all that some of them were, I mean, most of them were motivated to some extent by concern for children, which we can all sympathise with. But also many of them had a sort of conspiratorial type view of the internet world, where there were these large companies out there who were determined actually to do as much damage as they could because it made them the best profits and so on. And we'd lost control of all of this. Of course, what they don't recognise is you can end up with perverse outcomes. We are not the largest market in the world. There will come a point where companies will say, as a matter of principle, we are committed, some of them at least, are committed to free speech. End-to-end encryption is one of the big things that is going to come up at some stage because the bill creates circumstances in which Ofcom can require people like WhatsApp and so forth to open up the end-to-end encryption, which they claim they literally cannot do at the moment. It's not sort of technically possible, but they'd have to insert some device for doing it. There'll come a point where people like WhatsApp will say, well, we won't service the UK market. I mean, we're not the largest market in the world or the most important. So I think Ofcom really is, putting its big boots on, but it's not necessarily the case that they're quite as effective and going to be as effective as they think.
And there is nothing new under the sun, is there, that in 1534 Parliament passed an act requiring the word Pope to be deleted from all printed books in England. I have books printed prior to 1534 where the crossing out has not taken place, or the crossing out is so feeble that you can still read it through. The best efforts of regulators and bureaucrats, even in those days when you could be in serious trouble if you didn't obey, don't ultimately work. It requires culture and communities to change rather than regulators to think they can solve all the world's problems.
Well, I didn't know about the word Pope, but curiously, at the second reading of the bill, I did say that there was a great similarity between what we were trying to do and a sort of collection of medieval clerics trying to stop printing from getting out of control. And of course, it did get out of control completely from under them, as these things do. And I think we have to accept there will be this.
Thank you very much. Patrick Christ is coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the weather in Somerset, absolutely glorious. Tip-top, the best possible December weather.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Whilst it's pretty mild at the moment, we are going to see temperatures dropping as we go through the next 24 to 48 hours or so. And before that, we have some strong winds and some heavy rain due to an area of low pressure that's currently tracking just to the north of the UK, and it is deepening as it does so. As a result, we've already seen the winds strengthening. The strongest winds overnight will be around western coastal parts. Here, gusts could reach 50 to 60 miles per hour, and there will be quite a bit of wet weather around, the heaviest, most persistent rain towards the north and west. With all the unsettled weather around, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, most places staying in high single figures, if not double digits. So it will be a mild start to the day for many of us tomorrow, but quite a blustery or windy one. Across southern parts of England, there will be some outbreaks of drizzly rain and also some low cloud bringing